Well, a very good morning to you. It's Friday, June 24th, 2022. I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome to the program. Welcome to us here at WESN and WESNCC. This is today's edition of AM Prime. We'll get to the program in a moment. I just want to break some news for those of you who may not know. There's been a change of government in Grenada, Carriacou and Petite Martinique. As a result of the elections yesterday, the ruling NNP lost badly. They remain with 6 out of 15 seats. The NDC has taken over after a number of straight wins by the outgoing Prime Minister now, Dr. Keith Mitchell. You remember him saying that he was going to be bowing out because he wanted to win this one and move on, because he says that Grenada is in a better place than it had been for decades, and he brought some peace and civility to the island there. Well, he's moving on now because of yesterday's elections. Let's come back to the moment. In the next hour of the program, we'll be talking with Ms. Diane Haddad. She's the chairman of the Tobago division of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. We're talking about the Tobago budget. You just saw that in the news. The Chief Secretary making some demands on the government in Trinidad, taking apart his view on the Minister of Finance, saying that he's sitting down in Port of Spain without knowing anything about what's happening in Tobago and setting financial agendas. Well, that will come in the second hour of the program. Also, we're talking this morning with Mr. David West. He's the director of the Police Complaints Authority. They have their own investigation going on into that incident in which a man who was being arrested was kicked at least twice by police officers conducting that arrest. Something was wrong with that from the points of view of a lot of people. And so that the PCA is having its own investigation into it, quite apart from the internal investigation of the Police Services, what they call Professional Standards Bureau. We share with you the numbers, we share with you the Newsday poll, the question and the responses. We take you around the region a little bit as well. But right now, with us, economist Dr. Marlene Atts. The question is, as on the front page of some of the papers yesterday, and continuing to the issue about the price of flour and what that will do to the continuing increase in the cost of living, with a number of things. That is just part of the economic situation we face in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Atts has agreed to talk with us about that. Good morning. Good to see you.
Hi, good morning, Andy. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, well, thanks for coming. So locate for us what this as a single item, if you like, adds to the pressures about the cost of living in the country.
Well, as you stated in your introduction, it's really part of a whole conversation that is taking place in Trinidad and Tobago that ought to be taken in Trinidad and Tobago. So while there is focus, and understandably so, there is some focus on flour, I don't think the issue is flour per se. The issue really is increasing inflation in Trinidad and Tobago, and inflation that Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the world. I know many of your viewers, your listeners, many Trinbagonians tune in to what is happening in other countries. They have family, friends in the diaspora. So I think many people will understand that what we're witnessing in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the rising food prices and the rising cost of living, what economists couch as inflation, and it is indicative of this ongoing increase in prices. This is happening worldwide. You have persons, the UK, for example, telling you that they go into the supermarket and the shelves, there is either limited amounts of particular items, or you're limited in terms of how many of those items you can buy at any point in time. So what we're witnessing is not a Trinidad and Tobago phenomenon. It is a global phenomenon spurred on by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But of course, this started at least 2 years ago with the onset of COVID-19. And what we have been hearing about supply chain challenges and logistics challenges, meaning simply that the world global trade takes place and goods move from one country to another. And because of different kinds of measures that would have started in COVID-19, so lockdowns and restrictions on travel, restrictions on movement, that would have started the supply chain and the logistics challenges. And now, of course, the war, and fast forward now to 2022, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has exacerbated that situation. And what happens to countries such as ours, developing countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, we're a small player in this global space, and we're very heavily dependent on food, on goods and services produced elsewhere, and we import them into Trinidad and Tobago. So the conversation is not simply about flour, but the conversation is about what is happening in the global space and how it has impacted on prices in Trinidad and Tobago and how it will continue to impact on prices in Trinidad and Tobago. So just to kind of focus a little bit on Ukraine, I'm not a Ukraine specialist, but one of the things that has become very clear is Ukraine's significant role in providing outputs to the rest of the world, one of which is wheat. Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of wheat, and wheat is what we use to make our flour. So the conversation that we're having now and the convulsions in the society around the increases in the price of flour are simply as a result of Ukraine not being able to play as active a role as it has been playing in terms of exporting, because we're in the middle of a war with Russia. And essentially, those shortages and those higher prices, because of the conflict and all of the attendant issues around the conflict and the supply chain, those higher prices then being passed on to all of the other countries, including countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, that are dependent on these issues. So that is the flour conversation. But the flour conversation could also be a rice conversation or any other kind of conversation. And I think we really need to contextualize what is happening. So NFM is simply responding, NFM, Nutrimix, and all of the other importers, and it's, as I said, it's a food conversation. It's not simply a flour conversation, responding to the prices that they are in fact receiving when they import these goods from other countries.
Right, and well, in the case of NFM, we had the chairman and the CEO on the program yesterday, and they were elaborating on what the decision the company has taken to absorb some of the natural increases and to they find ways internally to address their systems and processes to not put the entire burden.
The full brunt of the price increase.
Yeah. But the question is, how long can a company hold on if it is finding a situation in which, well, its intake is taking a beating because of having to do that, and they couldn't quite find a response to that yesterday when I was talking with them. But it seems as though this is short term, and at some point.
Yes, it's a conversation, Andy. I mean, I would have missed the program yesterday, so I'm not fully aware of what the chairman and the CEO would have said, but certainly they will be trying to address some of their internal business processes and their practices to see how best they can improve efficiencies and not pass on everything to the consumer. But the fact of the matter is that NFM is simply acting as an intermediary between the importers, what is happening in terms of their internal processes at NFM, and the consumers, we the consumers. And if the price that NFM receives the raw material, the imported raw material, that price continues to escalate, the company, I would imagine, and I'm saying this very carefully, I'm not fully aware of all of the internal mechanisms and the business processes at NFM, but it would be hard pressed for the company to continue to bear those higher prices. So consumers will have to face the reality that this is certainly not a short-term phenomenon. For as long as the global space, and I always want us to come back to that to understand that we are operating in a global space. So as long as there are convulsions in the global space, those convulsions will have an impact on us in our day-to-day lives. So we should not, as I keep saying, not simply focus on the flour issues, but really put our minds in a space where we understand that life is going to be a little challenging for us. So we really have to start to frame in our minds and to frame a narrative that says we have to do things differently. We have to confront this crisis and embrace this crisis and start to think differently, because it's flour today, it's chicken tomorrow. In fact, it was probably chicken last week. Yeah. It is going to be something else at another point in time, because prices generally are increasing, and we have to make more conscious decisions as consumers.
So, what are the ways you think we ought to be thinking differently and therefore finding approaches to addressing life with that difference?
Well, I mean, in terms of the flour conversation, I don't want to focus too much on that, but the flour conversation, within recent days and following the announcement, the initial announcement that prices were going to increase, there was a resurrection of the conversation around other kinds of flours, root crop flours. So the cassava flour, the breadfruit flours, I understand there's sweet potato flour as well. Some of these conversations, and of course, some of these things people are saying as a way of kind of balancing the conversation that we can actually use these locally produced flours. The conversation is around the pricing. And of course, these things are not produced, these locally produced flours are not produced to scale. So they probably will have a higher price point than the flour. So that is one aspect of it. And the benefit of that, we have to balance the nutritional value of what we import. So we know that the regular flour as we consume it has gluten in it. And for those of us that focus on healthier lifestyles and nutritional lifestyles, we're moving towards more gluten-free kinds of diets, which of course we can have from the ground provision flours. So your cassava flours, your breadfruit flours, etc. Breadfruit is not a ground provision, but I think you get the drift of what I'm speaking about. So there is that opportunity for us to make that shift. But I recognize that is not going to be an appropriate alternative in all cases. So we're talking about our doubles, we're talking about our roti, we're talking about the things that many Trinbagonians have as part of their staple diet. Now, of course, there are decisions that will have to be made. It's either you consume less of those items or the people who are producing them make some very strategic, small changes because, again, what you don't want is for the price of these items to also increase because what we're simply going to be doing, and it's a textbook definition of inflation, the prices are just going to be chasing each other. So as the price of flour increases, the price of things like our doubles and our roti increases, all of the bread products increases. We saw some companies publishing their increased prices. And that is a classic textbook definition of what inflation is. Prices are just going to be chasing each other and everything is going to be skyrocketing. And at some point in time, we have to make decisions. So the vendors who sell some of these very popular items will have to make some choices. I mean, I engage with one such vendor and, she, of her own accord, has decided that she would either make a product slightly smaller to maintain the price, or if consumers want a larger product, variant of her product, they will, of course, decide that they want to absorb the higher price point. And there are those kinds of decisions that people will have to make in terms of their day-to-day consumption patterns. Vendors also have to make some decisions in terms of how they will market their particular products so that we don't continually find ourselves in a spiral of increasing prices. I think customers and consumers also need to balance their needs versus their wants. We have grown accustomed within recent years, and before COVID and before Ukraine and everything, you go to a supermarket and you simply buy items on the basis of some kind of interest that you may have, or you see where you have some extra dollars in your pocket. Things are not the way they used to be. So perhaps customers need to go back to those days where you simply shop and you consume what you actually need in terms of satisfying some dietary or some nutritional value, as opposed to, the wild spending sprees that we used to engage in. Because one, the prices are simply too high on all of the goods. So this is why I keep repeating that the conversation is not simply about flour. Prices are really very high. Prices of everything have increased in the supermarkets. And this is not an indictment of the supermarkets themselves, but they are importing based on the demand. The consumers are demanding, and they're importing at higher prices. So they themselves are facing higher prices. So I think there are choices and priorities to be made all around in terms of how we manage our business, given the current scenarios that we're facing and given what is likely to continue for some months to come. So I think we need to focus on that. I mean, there is the conversation not to put too many things on the table, but there is also the conversation around fuel. If fuel prices continue to rise,
yes,
there will be an implication inside of there as well. So I think we need to step back and understand all of these intersecting issues that are in fact going to continue to impact on our livelihoods for some months to come.
You think the decision makers maybe be looking at it, but presenting that kind of sort of broad picture perspective for the country sufficiently?
No, that's an easy question. No, I don't think we're having the kinds of conversations that we ought to be having to bring a perspective to the population, sufficiently broad perspective to the population. Not a perspective that confuses people, but a perspective that puts things on the table and we understand how all of these issues are in fact related. So the Minister of Trade, I think I saw either yesterday in today's newspapers, she is lambasting those persons who have been selling, right, who started.
Who raised their prices and so on.
That's correct, who immediately raised their prices. And that is a cultural norm in Trinidad and Tobago. As soon as something is announced, you actually see the price increasing 5 minutes after. But I think there is an opportunity for the Minister of Trade and for the government generally to have more meaningful dialogues with these suppliers to ask them to hold their hands. I mean, there is a reality that importers are facing. Importers are facing higher prices. They're importing these goods at higher prices because they're trying to satisfy a local demand. I've heard several members of the Supermarket Association, including the president himself, talk about the fact that they're trying to bring in cheaper alternatives to certain kinds of products so that the consumers will not face the full brunt of the higher prices available on the imported goods. But I do think that there is an opportunity, for the government to intervene. I mean, there's a conversation around whether or not the government can control the prices. Government can't control the prices at which we import the goods. The conversation can be had between those importers and the markup. So I think that is an opportunity coming out of the Minister of Trade's negative comments towards those persons who are price gouging and increasing their prices almost immediately. I think there's an opportunity for a conversation. So that's the first part. And I think the second part of it is that there needs to be, I would suggest that there are more holistic conversations with the population about what is happening and what is the likely trajectory for the country and for our cost of living, and what might be conversations happening within the cabinet about what they intend to do. But again, I come back to when we had the media review and the Minister of Finance announced that Trinidad had earned some fiscal space as a result of the war in Ukraine. I mean, he didn't quite put it like that, but the economists and those of us who were commenting on it really understood that the only reason that we were getting that kind of fiscal breathing space in the Trinidad and Tobago context was a result of President Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. And we also said at that time, I certainly said it, I think, on this program, if not on at another forum, that it was not sustainable, and we really cannot be overly optimistic about the Ukraine-Russia situation being, as it were, some kind of opportunity for Trinidad and Tobago, because it was not sustainable. So we really have to put all of those conversations together, I think, in a more meaningful way, show all of the intersecting issues and how ultimately they will impact on the population of Trinidad and Tobago and on this very thorny issue of inflation and increasing cost of living that many citizens are facing. You're facing it, Andy, I'm facing it.
Of course.
Everyone is facing it throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and some people are less prepared to essentially absorb that increasing cost of living, and we really have to manage those persons who are tottering at the edge of vulnerability and of poverty, as it were. And these increasing prices really will certainly push them over the edge.
Right. I want to get to the potential for even greater sort of heat in the society generally around the issue of the negotiations in the public sector for higher wages and what's happening with that, and to what extent that will contribute to instability if until that isn't going too far. But before we get there, I'm just going to go back to the minister's statement in her position yesterday that she said, we know who these people are who are, in her view, putting unreasonable markups. So what is that ominous, or isn't it, when a minister says, we know who you are, as though we will come after you?
Well, I don't know what, I can't, hazard a guess about the minister's intent behind behind her statement, but I certainly do think if there is information that persons are deliberately taking advantage of these situations and imposing further hardships, I think there is an opportunity for there to be conversations between the Ministry of Trade and whichever other relevant authorities and such persons to ensure that undue pressure is not put onto the population of Trinidad and Tobago. So that is all I would want to say on that matter. I mean, it does sound ominous, but I do think if there is information, something ought to be done as opposed to simply coming out in the public space and saying, we know who you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, citizens are suffering as a result of these draconian measures that some persons have decided to put in place.
Right. I think we have a slight snatch of the minister's comments from yesterday's meeting. Let's take a look and a listen at it.
Minimum, but I do make a strong appeal to the retailers, in particular, the 40 and 60% markups generally that we're seeing on very basic items, unacceptable. Because there are supermarkets that are retailing, that are doing markups at 25%, I know, on basic items, and sometimes lower. So we ask them not to be unconscionable. This is a time of crisis in terms of food security for the world, not Trinidad and Tobago. Minister Young was so right. This is not about us alone, not just about the region. This is about the world. It's a global situation.
All right, so just before we go, let's factor in there in what's happening on the ground in the society at large, the demand for more than the government is offering thus far with these public sector unions. Now, how does that add to, well, the sense of nervousness that you feel as to what might happen? What is up ahead facing us?
I start these conversations by saying I started off my working career as a public servant, and I maintain that I still am a public servant. I work at the University of the West Indies, but I'm a public servant, a servant of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I empathize with colleagues in the public sector per se who have been working on salaries from several years, sometimes up to a decade. But I maintain the position that if you are working, there's several things that I want to say on this conversation. If you're working for a salary of $6,000, I know that it is difficult to maintain an adequate lifestyle with the increase in prices. Having said that, however, the demand for increases in wages at this time, and I suspect that the 2% has been rejected openly, 4% will be rejected openly. I quite suspect that the unions would want to see something, a wage increase, more aligned to the rate of inflation. And I would want to caution against that for very simple reasons. If I'm working for $6,000 and I get a 10% salary increase, so let's ignore the back pay and the impact it's going to have on the government's coffers, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm working for $6,000 a month and I get a 10% increase, that takes me to $6,600 a month. Well, the first thing is that it puts me into a higher tax bracket. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. The second thing that we need to understand is that with that $600 increase in my salary, it does not give me any additional purchasing power when I go to the supermarket, because the prices of everything in the supermarket have already increased. So I come back almost to the same level of disposable income, money in my hand available to spend, in fact, less, because I'm now also in a higher tax bracket. I would caution against that. And I would caution and I would suggest to my colleagues in the union and my public sector colleagues, brothers and sisters in the public sector, that perhaps now is a time to ask for to negotiate for those kinds of benefits that actually contribute to an improved standard of living. How about a health insurance as a health sector worker, health insurance that affords me the opportunity to going to a private health sector clinic. I pay some small co-share co-payment, but I have access to healthcare if I or my family needs that. How about ensuring that I can possibly get preferential housing benefits in terms of becoming a homeowner? We all know that different financial institutions have different kinds of thresholds in terms of whether you qualify for a mortgage. How about as a public sector worker, the government negotiates that as a public sector worker with X number of years experience, as the case might be as a public sector worker, I have preferential access for mortgage rates, notwithstanding my salary of, let's say, $6,000. I'm keeping the $6,000 by way of an example. I think these are ultimately going to redound to the individual's benefit and will have possibly less of an inflationary impact on the country. But certainly, a negotiation for a rate of increase of, let's say, 10%, and I'm coming back to my 10% example, with a salary of $6,000, does not put the public sector, does not put the public sector worker in any better or advantageous position. In fact, he or she might find him or herself in a worse position. And I would want to suggest that there are different kinds of narratives around the negotiations. Yes, I know the pain that everyone is feeling. As a consumer, I am feeling it myself. I go to the supermarket and you almost do, you do a double take because you're kind of like, that was the price I paid for that last month, as the case might be. So I understand the pain that is resonating throughout the public sector. And I understand the psychological need to have more money. But the reality is, you may find yourself not having more money in your hand and not being any better off. So I want to suggest that the conversations in terms of improved conditions for our public sector workers, the conversations take on a slightly different tenor, given my respectful view that asking for more money at this time is not necessarily going to result in a better quality of life or higher standard of living for our public sector.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Let's hope that they're listening to you, those who should be doing that. But thank you very much, Dr. Marlene Adds.
You're most welcome, Andy. Have a good day.
All right, so we're going to take a break. When we come back, we share with you the COVID-19 numbers, the Newsday poll, and we talk with Mr. David West, the director of the Police Complaints Authority, on the investigation into that incident, which we are very familiar with. So stay with us.
People of Blanchisseuse and environs, something big is coming your way. Be part of the initial membership drive for the establishment of the North Coast Credit Union Cooperative Society Limited this Sunday, 26th June at 2 p.m. sharp at the Blanchisseuse Community Center. Walk with $100 and your ID card. For more information, call 783-1971. Tell a friend, arrive early and walk with.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best. I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in-depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. This has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to the program. Well, let's look quickly at the numbers where we are this morning with COVID-19, the new positive cases, and the rest of that agenda. So there they are, 155,480, that's the total recovered patients. 6,946, the total active positive cases. The death toll now at 3,994. 166,420, that's the total positive cases reported in the country since we began the counting on March 12, 2020 to yesterday. 130 is new positive cases reported in the 24 hours up to the end of the day yesterday, and 117 the number of persons in hospital with COVID in the parallel healthcare system. So that's what the numbers look like. Let's move now to the Newsday poll, the question and responses. The question is, would you prefer paying a higher price for meals or have less food for an unchanged price? And the response to that question is, I would rather pay a higher price for meals. That's one response. And the other one, the issue with higher prices for meals is accessibility. Will the average citizen be able to access food when prices become higher? Where would we stand as a country in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger? There's also the link between poverty levels and hunger, which can lead to a health crisis. Having less food for unchanged prices needs to be looked at from the perspective of meeting the daily required nutritional needs. So those are the responses to the question. With us now in the Zoom is Mr. David West. He's the chairman of the director, in fact, of the Police Complaints Authority. They are conducting their own separate investigation into that incident, which we know about. Police officers were seen kicking a man who was under arrest. And the question is why and what is expected to be brought out by this investigation. Mr. West, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning to you and your viewers.
All right. So like I said, you know, in requesting that you come and talk with us about this is that from how I see it, you say it's an investigation that you have to have. And my question is, when you saw what happened, what do you investigate further?
Okay. We got a copy of the video, as did everybody else from the social media. Now, under our Act, Section 26, we can initiate a complaint. So once we are of the view that the complaint falls within our remit, meaning it's a criminal offense, it's a serious disciplinary offense or police corruption, the PCA can get involved. So what we have done is we have looked at the video and we also have looked at the police use of force policy. Now the police use of force policy was amended in 2018. And if I could just quickly let you know what it says, Andy.
Certainly.
So the use of force framework, it says stage 1 is perceived. The officer considers all information, all available information, and develops a preliminary assessment of the situation. Okay, so the officers would have come and seen what was going on and assessed the situation. Stage 2 is assess. Officer immediately processes the information based on his knowledge, experience, training, and weighs his options. The third step is plan. Officer considers and selects best course of action available based on his assessment of the situation. And finally, they act. The officer acts in response to the level of threat encountered, The action will be dictated by the officer's assessment of the situation, but may be halted, revised, delayed, or replaced with an alternative course of action as determined by the officer as a result of a change in the circumstances being encountered. So this is what guides the police officer in the use of force policy. This is what should have guided the officers when they went to arrest the gentleman who was on the ground, and as we can see, the kicking to the head when he was on the ground. Now, what we will do is we will look and determine what criminal offenses, if any, took place, and what disciplinary offenses, if any, took place. The criminal offenses that we will be looking at is misbehavior in public office. That is defined and there's case law on it, where it must be alarming. The action done by the officers must be, or the person in public office must be alarming to the public, or it must, what they say, is shock the conscience of the public. And the person must be acting in the execution of his duty. So the question is, were the police officers acting in the execution of their duty? Yes, they were. Was the action of kicking the person in the head so alarming as to shock the conscience of the society? Also, we will look at assault, of course, and of course, assault has different arms, grievous bodily harm, etc. We would also look at the disciplinary offenses and the police service regulations which guide police discipline, whether it was discreditable conduct, whether it was unlawful and or unnecessary exercise of force. So this is what we would look at in our investigation when we go to investigate the matter.
All right, so let me use your legal language now. So prima facie, from what you've seen, a case is not made out. You talk about the kicking in the head, but that was the second one. One officer kicked the man in what looked like, well, in his rib area, rib cage or so. And then this other one just appeared on the scene and this...
Well, Andy, let me just say that no determination has been made on this matter as yet. It's still being investigated by the PCA. But prima facie, the actions that we have seen falls within our remit. So therefore, that allows us to investigate the matter. That gives us the locus to investigate the matter.
Yeah. And so distinguish your investigation from the one that the Professional Standards Bureau would be conducting, to the extent that you know what obtains there. So they're looking at whether or not the arrest was handled according to their professional standards.
Well, I'm sure that they will be looking at the arrest and the conduct afterwards within the use of force policy manual and the criminal law, like how we are doing. Where we have the advantage of is that we will, normally speaking, independent witnesses come forward and they prefer to talk into the PCA than to the police. So we would have witness statements in addition to video evidence, station diary extracts, and also, of course, what the police wrote in their diaries when they came back from the exercise. Because after the police came back from the exercise, they would have to write in their diary what transpired. And of course, they would be asked to give a report on what transpired. So we would have all that information too, in addition to any civilian witnesses who wish to come forward and give evidence or statements to the PCA.
Well, talk about that a little bit, because what you're saying that is, that's a point, a disclosure that I think is critical and it's important. So your investigation will involve what the police say when they write their comments, so they report in their diary. You want to examine what they say against what is seen as that stacks up against the measurements you use.
Yeah, and also too, Andy, whether or not what they write in their diary, it makes sense, whether or not it adds up. For example, does it add up to the medical evidence we may get? They may say they may say that when they hit the fella, it was a hit in self-defense and not much force was used. But when we get to medical, we can see that it may show lacerations to the body, it may show a deep wound, etc. So we look at what they say compared to what is written in the report to make sure that they corroborate each other or they are at odds. And if they are at odds, well, then something is not wrong or something is not adding up.
Yeah, so you all will require and request to get the reports of whatever medical exams were conducted on the person.
Yeah, and under our Act, we have the power to ask for any document from a public authority within a specified time. Okay, so if we say police service, give us those documents within 14 days, we have it's set out in the Act, and they have 14 days within which to give it to us. If they don't give it to us, well, then we can write for it again, ask them for it again, or what we can do is we can, via summons, go to court and take out a summons against that officer who failed to respond to our request.
How has it been? What's the typical manner in which these things are handled?
Well, normally, Andy, they get our letter of request, which gives them the authority to give it to us, and that's fair enough. I understand that. And then, normally, in the course of the work, they do give us these documents we need. They have been very forthcoming in the documents that they have been giving us. It may take longer than the 14 days, but they still do give it to us. We are in contact with them. Sometimes, it's not available right away. The photocopy has broken down, etc. But the point is that we do get it eventually within a requisite time frame so we can do our investigation.
So the custom is that they don't take an inordinate amount of time. You have to be besieging them and so on. Sometimes it depends on what the seriousness of the matter is, or as a general rule, they comply with what the expectations are given what is written as to how they should.
As a general rule, yes, they do comply with what we ask for. The relationship, of course, has improved over the 7 years I've been here. In the beginning, it was a bit sticky, but now I think they understand, they have policies now, they have documents, and even they have a standing order too by the former Commissioner of Police saying that any information the PCA wants, they should give it to us. So it's in their standing orders.
Yeah, so this is on the issue of what you're looking for, so that you're going beyond just what is seen on the tape. You talked about wanting to get medical reports to see to what extent these actions may have caused injuries, as you say.
Yes, Andy, we go much further beyond. I mean, depending on the case, we can get CCTV footage. We write the Ministry of National Security, I believe, that has the overall command of the footage. We write, for example, the Forensic Science Center if we want to get a postmortem report or postmortem certificate. We write the police for the station diaries. We write for, when they take out firearms, we get that register of how many firearms went out, how much ammunition went out, how many firearms came back, how much ammunition came back. So there's a whole host of requests we make that the investigators know what to make, and then we go about it. So it's not only the footage that we see or the statement that we take, it's other information and evidence we try to gather to come to a just conclusion or a just result on the investigation.
Yeah, and you would have access to the report of the Professional Standards Bureau as well?
Yes, we do, because that is a report from a public body. So we have legal access to it.
Given the track record in matters like these that you have come to understand, what are we looking at? What time frame are we looking at before you could be able to say, well, look, this is what we found, this is what we conclude as a result of this incident?
Okay, well, Andy, for example, each matter is, I would say, different, okay? I mean, not two matters are the same. So obviously it takes a different time for different matters. For example, the police shooting in Rich Plain, I could tell you that I'm going to see the DPP very soon on that matter. So, and that happened in April, and we're in end of June. So that's about 2 months or 2.5 months. So that's pretty good. We got all the information in that matter. Other matters have been closed, and other matters have been investigated. So, and police shootings, by their very nature, take a little longer, maybe 6 to 8 months police shootings take to investigate. So it just varies. Now, of course, some offenses are summary offenses. Like, for example, assault is only 6 months, and the DPP has 6 months, or the police have 6 months within which to lay a charge. So therefore, we have to what we do is we prioritize those matters, and we try to get our investigation completed within 3 months, to give the police and DPP 2 months to decide whether or not they wish to charge the individual or not.
Yeah, so we're looking at, well, by the end of the year or probably into next year, or you're just saying that's sort of the general...
But Andy, I would say, and I don't want to bind my investigators, but this matter with the police kicking, we have the video footage, we have to get the statements from the police, the medical evidence, maybe any witness statements any witnesses who may want to come forward. And of course, we should get, and it'll be better if we get a statement from the person being, attacked by the police. Okay? I'm not sure where it's reached right now because I don't get directly involved in all the investigations. Okay? So I should say by end of the year, this matter should be completed.
Yeah. And to what extent you might take into account if it comes across in the gathering of information, there has been sort of word on the ground of people who were around the incident said that the police reacted to at least one of them having been spat upon by the officer. Does that sort of...
Well, we will get the statement, but we will have to take that into consideration whether or not that force was justifiable. You understand? If somebody, what force is justifiable if somebody spits in your face? Is a kick in the head when you're on the ground justifiable? Or is a slap across the face justifiable? So that is what we will look at to determine whether or not that use of force was reasonable at the time.
Yeah. All right. It will be very interesting to see the conclusion of your investigation into it, Mr. West. So thank you very much for talking with us tonight.
My pleasure, Andy. Have a great day, and have a great day to your viewers also. Thank you.
Well, same to you. Thank you very much. David West, the Director of the Police Complaints Authority. Well, let's take a quick look around the region now as we head up to 7 o'clock, and we tell you this story. The sugar shortage in St. Lucia continues with the latest consignment of the sought-after commodity. Well, they say almost. HS4 here with that story.
We have been able to get some supplies, both brown and white, and St. Lucia have consumed almost all of it.
Sugar remains in short supply in St. Lucia. Minister for Commerce Emma Hippolyte says that while the government has been able to secure quantities of the staple, the demand for the commodity has been overwhelming.
All what came in, we have a few bags left in reserve, but as I have said before, we need to ensure that, especially the white, that we allocate for our manufacturers.
Sugar is often the key ingredient in many manufactured product offerings, from breads, cakes, juices, jams, and much more. Hippolyte says government efforts at sourcing additional sugar supplies have been diversified.
We are trying to get some brown sugar from Barbados, so I'm actually waiting for the PM we have to move away from the normal procurement procedures to try to get that. So we're trying to get some brown sugar in from Barbados. While I was in Guyana, I was able to meet with the general manager of Gaisuco, and we have agreed on some logistics that we believe will deal with the problems.
The Commerce Minister says drastic changes are also being proposed for sugar supplier shipping vessels. In anticipation of growing the sugar inventories, Hippolyte says that the government capacity must also increase.
We need to increase our warehouse space. So all that is on the table, and we're hoping that we can resolve that part of it.
Hippolyte says the government is working assiduously to source the vital commodity and bring an end to St. Lucia's sugar shortage.
But here's this as well. An increasing number of persons living in Barbados are seeking help. We have more in this report from Barbados Today.
The spike in the number of people turning to the Salvation Army for help. Today, the Army's Divisional Business Manager, Major Sherma Evelyn, says more people have been seeking food, clothing, and even shelter to better cope with the rising cost of living.
Middle of June,
that's 2021.
We had 13,000. For this year, it is 14,903 persons that we have fed. The persons receive clothing. It's over 500 persons receive clothing, and that's clothing, furnishings, books for like school and so, and furnishings, baby clothes. Young mothers having babies, they want Pampers, formula, such. Also, our pantry program last year around this time, we had up from January to June. Middle of June, we had over 2,500. This year, we have 3,116 persons receiving food hampers.
And that number is growing?
Yes.
We're going to the news at 7 o'clock, and on the other side of that, we're talking with Ms. Diane Haddad. She represents the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce in Tobago. She's the head of the Tobago branch of that. We're talking about the discussions taking place right now, the budget being read in Tobago, what the Chief Secretary is demanding or asking for from the Minister of Finance and from the central government in Port of Spain, these and other matters. When we come back, stay with us.
Seven is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best. I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in-depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Psyched, Thursdays at 11 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
In this season, we talk more about health, wellness, and everything in between. I am so excited to share with you everything about health and wellness so that you can design the life that you've always dreamed of. Join me here on What's Up Doc.
What's Up Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
People of Blanchisseries and environs, something big is coming your way. Be part of the initial membership drive for the establishment of the North Coast Credit Union Cooperative Society Limited this Sunday, 26th June at 2 p.m. sharp at the Blanchisseries Community Center. Walk with $100 and your ID card. For more information, call 783-1971. Tell a friend, arrive early and walk with.
The Mary Immaculate Prayer Group and Friends presents its prayer breakfast on August 31st in aid of Monsignor Christian Pereira. The prayer breakfast begins from 9 a.m. at the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception. Cost is only $200. Come support the Cup of Gratitude in aid of Monsignor Pereira, August 31st.
Tickets are available at the parish office of the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception and the parish of Our Lady of Perpetual Help.
Welcome back to the program. Let's tell you about some headlines in the news day this morning. One of them says the THA is requesting $3.97 billion for its fiscal year 2022 to 2023. That was provided in the statement yesterday, reading the budget in Tobago, the Chief Secretary Farley Augustin. But the Minority Council is saying that that is an unrealistic expectations. That's 6.9% of the Trinidad and Tobago budget. I think that's the formula that has been worked out years ago by the Dispute Resolution Committee for arrangements between Tobago and Trinidad. These things and other matters, how are they playing generally across the island in Tobago? We're talking about that now with Ms. Diane Haddad. She's the head of the Tobago Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Good morning, ma'am. Good to see you, as always.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. So before we get to the specifics about some of the things we told you we would want to talk about, what's your sort of overall kind of cover story response to what you heard from the Chief Secretary?
Well, I have to admit I only had to listen to it last night as I had a funeral yesterday. But I have to say that first impression, I listened to the entire thing, pretty detailed, pretty holistic, and very much, as I would say, someone did their homework or persons did their homework. A lot of reading was done and a lot of things that were on the cards and in documents, probably collecting some dust, have been brought to light. They have been fleshed out. And I have to say that we look forward to the meat in this budget in terms of the action plan. So that being the case, I want, before you ask me, to say then 6.9% will be well deserved in terms of achieving this.
Yeah, because that's the aspiration from the time of the decades ago when Ian Robinson was still chairman of the Tobago House of Assembly, and they worked out this formula. I don't remember a time when it was ever met.
And it's about time that we stop starving the island's capital development and allow it to take place for the betterment of the 60,000 people on that island, and by extension, the people of Trinidad who will benefit from actually enjoying the island in a social capacity or from a financial perspective, from economic development, that they will benefit from the investments they have made, those who have, and open up opportunities for others to do so. So I think it's about time. It was very refreshing last night. Although I had a very long, tired day, I actually had to stay up until way past midnight in order to listen to it. It was well worth the listen.
Yeah, you said some things were well fleshed out. A lot of good work went into it. Are there things, that one or two things that stood out for you as to say, when you heard it, you say, well, as you say, it's been a refreshing presentation. So go ahead.
I'll tell you what was good for me. I am a thorough person. I'm holistic. I think of all aspects of anything that I'm doing. And so that for me, it was not repetitive. It was not cut and paste. I mean, I don't know. I remember one year taking the budget and literally changing the date and giving a response because it was the identical thing from before. So, and I know I was beaten for it, but I have to say that this one got my attention for me listening right through, which had to do with the fact that effort went in. I have to say, for the 6 months, we have been nudging as to whether what was taking place. And if this is what was taking place, then congratulations to the persons who were working on it. Because we were nudging as to what was happening, because there was nothing going on. So if this is where the work was going in order for us to start to fix this place, then I think so be it. It's time for us to move forward. Unfortunately, we have to wait till September to listen to the other side of the coin and then wait for it to be debated, for funds to be released for us to get going. I would have loved if we could have started this morning, because Tobago has suffered for at least 13 years on a minus foot, and therefore we need to get it fixed. So having said that, Andy, I have to tell you, pleased plus.
Yes. All right, but in the final part of the clip we just saw there, he was accusing the Minister of Finance of not knowing what is happening on the ground in Tobago and staying in Port of Spain and coming up with prescriptions. But you have two members of Parliament in the Parliament from Tobago, so don't they, well, I mean, I don't know, I'm asking you the question, but it should be asked of them. Don't they provide that kind of information as inputs into the national
group? Yeah. Let me tell you, there are many aspects of this, and I like to be fair to people. When you take on a role of that magnitude, you have to understand that it is a lot. And therefore, you have to contribute and do the job which is necessary in the Parliament in Trinidad. You also have to have the time to connect with your people on the ground and deliver to your communities, and to, of course, in this case, the island. So I'm not speaking about the Tobago representatives alone. I'm speaking generally.
All right.
So even the structure of that needs to be looked at to see if the persons who are members of Parliament or elected really get to do their whole job. I know in many instances they would have to sacrifice family. They will have to sacrifice a number of things in order to get it. Or you have to have a very understanding, mature environment in terms of your personal life for people to get it. You also have to have a very mature community or representation there in terms of support for you to get delivery. However, the other aspect of that, and this is me, so I don't like to, it doesn't matter what you give me to do. Once I take it on and I have to work the hours backwards to the morning or forwards into the night, the mindset created says that I have to deliver successfully. So I will stretch me to get it without trying as much as possible to sacrifice family and whatever. And I think that is where our dedication, commitment, loyalty to success may be missing in terms of our representatives. Yes, they have to get up and get to Tobago, deal with the people, understand what's going on. And the more time they spend in Trinidad, of course, the less time they have understanding what's fundamentally taking place on the ground. So the comment will not be one that is incorrect. The comment will be very applicable in terms of, do they now understand what's going on in the ground, or are they been Trinidadianized so much that they now have forgotten the needs of Tobago? Or are they now part of the party in such an in-depth way, or culturalized into the brand that they represent, that they don't understand their role anymore? They get caught up in the frills and pompery in Trinidad. And therefore, all of those things. So you always have to keep a simple mind. You have to stay grounded. You have to stay holistic. You have to stay spiritual. You have to keep all those dots connected for you to win.
All right. I think let's just take another slice of what Mr. Augustine has been saying on this matter.
I'm sure the Prime Minister cannot inaccurately, ever again, inaccurately say that all Tobago contributes is 200 and something million.
Never.
We are grateful for the template that the Dispute Resolution Commission has established and see the upper limit of 6.9% as a good starting point, but not a settled position. Given the recent discoveries of oil and gas in the waters around Tobago, it is time to return to the bargaining table to negotiate a new revenue sharing agreement between Tobago and Trinidad. I wish to advise my friends on the other side who have been saying that had we gotten the woefully inadequate island government bill, we would have gotten more money. Caribbean Airlines will now have no excuses. The movement of Caribbean Airlines between the both islands is an essential service, and it is the duty of the central government to fund such an operation. Therefore, I am using this platform to say to Caribbean Airlines, please return to full capacity. It is inimical to Tobago's autonomy efforts to have some ministers sitting in an office in Port of Spain without a clue about Tobago's needs, cultural nuances and spatial issues, but down there deciding who can invest and where they can invest.
All right, so let's take with that piece about Caribbean Airlines. That continues to be a sore point in relations between the two islands and for people in Tobago particularly.
Right, so your clip had a lot of possible topics in there. So let's start with Caribbean Airlines. Yes, he's right. I mean, come on, Andy, I've done enough interviews over this. I've given licks, I've gotten licks, I've gotten victimized, I've gotten all of it. I've given some myself in terms of what the needs are over and over, but we were getting nowhere. So yes, we need to return to normal, Caribbean Airlines, and it is an essential service. I'm happy that the politicians are recognizing it's an essential service. So yes, the need is there and it needs to be addressed. And so the whole conversation of Caribbean Airlines getting to normal service, I did interviews only recently about it this week, where why are we at 12 flights and we have not identified or gotten any sort of information as to whether the issue is an equipment issue, an airport. Well, I don't want to say it's the opening of the airport. I mean, we have, I don't even know it's an equipment issue because we have equipment on the ground. Is it a subvention issue? And is it a staffing issue? Is it that we don't have the staff at Caribbean Airlines or the ground staff or pilots? What is the issue? Nobody has responded. Nobody has answered. So I'm happy that the table is now open up. And therefore, we need to have the conversation in terms of action. Why don't we have our flights regularized? Tobago is literally still on a lockdown when Trinidad has been open. What is the issue? And so it needs to be brought to the table. Caribbean Airlines need to do what's necessary. And if they, of course, politically stifled, they need to I don't know. They may not be able to say so publicly because their job will be on the line. What else will be the issue? So Diane Haddad will say it because I've already been victimized. So we need to have it open. And if it's politically motivated, please put on your maturity hats and let's get what's necessary for the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
I would tell you what came across as a huge curiosity for me a couple of months ago. I think it was before Easter when there was this clamor for more flights and so on. And the airline had to, from my understanding of it, have to seek permission from the Prime Minister to do that. And you wonder why that was necessary.
Hence my statement just now. If it's politically motivated or let's call managed, stifle, that's why I'm asking about the subvention. That's why I'm asking, is it that we don't have enough staff? Remember, Andy, pilots, a lot of staff was sent home. And what was strange, they were sent home just before the opening up from the pandemic. They kept them on pay. I think the agreement was some 57%. So the pilots had agreed to take a cut of 43%. That was in the news. And how come they were kept for that long period of time and just before we open up the economy, they get slips and sent home and flight attendants? And now we don't have staff to run the, if you have one, I have seen pilots that I know for years. And how come you on the air bridge today? What's going on? Boy, they call me out, yes, Gil. Anytime, one person fall ill or anything and we're in trouble. So is it that we have a problem? Could they please come out and say something? We'll be in support of Mr. Gavin Madeira and his team. Full support. Call for what you need. And let us know. And Mr. Ronnie Mohammed as chairman, what is necessary? Let's get it done. This is not about us covering anything. This is about us getting the country successful. This is what our rights are as people on earth.
Yeah, Mr. Augustine also says that the THA will absorb the extra cost for keeping the airport. He suggests the airport remains open until, was it 1 a.m. or whatever the time that the THA will absorb the extra costs in there.
And that's not anything new. Under Mr. Devant Maraj, I remember that clearly. We got the airport open when I think Ashwood Jack would have been the person who had that conversation, that fight back and forth. And the airport was open until we had a 1:40 a.m. flight in the morning that could have carried persons back. And people were saying, who was in the airport that hour? That flight was properly well utilized. The flights were used. People got a full day. People got to do things that they didn't have to overnight and carry up costs when they came for medical or whatever they got to do. They got to get a complete day of getting a successful model of using. Remember, all the facilities are not available in Trinidad. Okay? on the island of Tobago.
Yeah.
So a lot of things you have to come here for. But you can't leave, and by the time you get on the first flight in the morning, you come down in the traffic from the east, you get to where you're going, you realize that 10 o'clock is now the time we're speaking about to get anything done. And then you have to leave by 4 o'clock or whatever to catch back the last flight if you're going to cover that traffic going back to the east. So how much do you get done at the rate of productivity? You don't get very much done with the traffic. If somebody has to conquer east, west, north, and south, when I am here, I leave the house like before everybody and go and park up in people's car park and sleep until the first door opens and get what I have to get done right there. So as they open the door, I'm the first customer. And then I move from there. So I kind of work against the whole grain of things. But is that the way that you're supposed to operate? Those flights were very necessary. They were successful. And we need to carry it back to the conversation and to action. We also know that it would service international flights that may have an interest in coming into Tobago. Remember that your airport being open is one of the tick points in terms of them doing business with you. You can't have a closed airport if somebody has an emergency or whatever, and therefore the airport is closed. They can't leave later. They can't come in later. No, we need to open up the place and live. We need to open up and get to some international standard. Why are we being strangled and stifled all this time? Time to get back to what we had. It isn't anything we didn't have. Somebody gave it to us.
Yes.
Somebody has taken it away, and we need to get it back. That's the call.
All right. What's your response to the response of the minority leader saying that this budget is unrealistic, to expect that the central government will approve of...
Will give it?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Morris and his team, Ms. Daniel, let me say, they are part of a team. They have a job to do as opposition. And I have to share with you, we did have a meeting with them. And one of the things, I have to commend him on some of the things he said. Before I go to the things that he said, that he did complement aspects of the budget in terms of the business sector and things being put in place based on what has taken place for COVID. And if I were to look at the body language of both parties, the message was almost like, I wish I was reading that for my people of Tobago. Seriously. And this is not being said in a negative way or so, because I really saw, that there was care in there. And so he may be saying what he has to say, but I want to now call for him to actually carry that role in the best interest of the people. Once you're in leadership, your decision must be in the best interest of the people, not the culture or brand of the organization that is not necessarily heading down the right road. Now, so I will tell you, Andy, as I tell people recently, I'm not such a good team player when coming to things like that. Because when we are going down the road, you are going to divert and take off course what was the intention and the goal of us coming into this together, we're going and fight. We're going and fight. And I am not going to leave you to toss the thing and topple it and we fail, because time is one of the things you don't get back. And therefore, every time we do something like that and we derail the success, we are putting everybody back. We are not just putting you and me back, or because we are in the party or we are in government, we may have access to fix ourselves, but the people are suffering, and that's what we were voted in for, to treat with that. So regardless of what Mr. Morris and Petal Daniel said, I want to say that what I saw in those faces were two faces of, I wish was me reading that. And I want them to not lose sight and focus of what they can contribute towards the betterment of their own families, because Tobago is very close-knitted and very family. A lot of people are quite tied up. So they have to be seeing the bigger picture. But the comments about we won't get it, no, we're going to ask for it. In fact, we've asked for it. We've explained why we need it. And so we need now to ensure that it's given. However, when it's given, this document that I sat last night and came up with 6 pages of notes needs to be delivered. It's serious business. And therefore, that for me is where their role becomes more vigorous, to ensure that it is delivered. Not denying it, they are denying themselves. They are denying their own people that they represent. So no, we can't deny it and we can't bash it. We have to work with it because it's well done, it's holistic. And therefore now the needling and the investigative work will be done in the delivery. That's where it should be.
Yeah, you think for some people, putting yourself in, to the extent that is possible, in those shoes, it's a challenge for somebody being Tobagonian and being PNM in a time like this?
Yes. And I remember having conversations with some of the representatives now in the past saying, listen, you're young, you're bright, you have everything ahead of you to be a great leader. Do not let the culture of the organization destroy you, because you can rise above it and people would admire you for it. And it becomes a point where once the people want you, they almost have no choice but to keep you in the party. Let's put it that way. Because if the people want you, they have to keep you even if they don't like you. So you may become a thorn in the side of some. But let me tell you what also happens. What also happens is you get, because of your strength for right, you get to kind of, instead of festering bad, you kind of multiply the good. And if all of us, or many of us, took that role, we will create the change that we want. We will create the change. It will start small, and then one day we will recognize the growth that has taken place, and there'll be an avalanche of a beautiful country. But we have to understand that the pressures of those things, the male-female relationships, you feel you're not going to get back in there, and they're going to not let you get back to the opportunity to represent. But if you're doing your job and the people want you, guess what? They'll have to go back to the table several times for that. And I'm saying that that's what true management is about. That's what true leadership is about. So unfortunately, people give in and succumb to the pressure because they feel they don't have a choice. But we always have a choice.
All right, Diane Haddad, head of the Tobago Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Thank you very much once again.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
All right, well, thank you. Well, let's just tell you quickly what's in the Newsday Trinidad and Tobago and the Newsday Tobago as we seek to wrap the program up for this morning and this week. Well, I think I showed you on the front page. Well, Flower is the story there. This is the Weekend Tobago Newsday. That's the front page. The 60 debuts at CPL 2020, so that's the back page at 2022. And on the front page of the big paper, there's a new head for the Paria probe. The first chairman resigns and he's replaced, and they have not begun yet that inquiry into the diving tragedy. And James first, the TT Inter Knockouts, the young footballers, the young warriors there doing their thing. So that's a quick look at what's in these papers. The Friday Newsday, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Weekend Newsday, Tobago. Well, that's our broadcast for this morning and for this week then. We thank you for watching, and I can tell you that at 10 o'clock I'll be back with today's edition of 10 Questions. My guest will be Professor Pathmanan Umaharan. He's a cocoa industry expert at the University of the West Indies. We're talking about the interests of the European Union in Trinidad and Tobago's product that is known as cocoa, and what they want to do with it, what he sees are some of the benefits coming from re-exploitation of the idle lands of cocoa in the country. But before that, in about half an hour, the guys will come in for today's edition of Talking Point. That's Shah and Small after the news at 8. But for now, at least, I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend.